All right, so today we're going to talk about sandstone and in particular its uses in the region of Mohkinstsis, or what is now known as Calgary, Alberta. Just to give you a little close-up of some of the ornamentation and the filigree type carvings that are able to be achieved with this stone. Here's a remnant of one of the former courthouses that used to live downtown in Calgary. And you just get a sense looking at that, the level of detail that the masons were able to achieve by carving into that sandstone. So where did this all come from? Why do we have sandstone here? What's the relevance of any of this? If we dig back far enough into kind of a deep geological time, we learn that approximately 60 million years ago in this region, along with much of the continent of North America, there was this huge inland sea here. So we're calling that the Cretaceous Sea. If you notice where Alberta is, we're kind of right on the shoreline of part of that sea. So that's actually what ends up happening is as erosion takes place, sediment comes down to the banks of that sea, and it's shallow here, and that's actually what we need in order to get sandstone. So the sand travels down as it erodes, and it sinks down into the shoreline, and eventually becomes compacted into stone. More on that a little bit later. Okay, so in the Edsworthy Park area, we just taking a look at this sign here. It makes mention of First Nations using the area as a dwelling. So we have evidence of teepee rings and basically human activity from our Indigenous peoples. So a little bit on that. So for more than 10,000 years, Indigenous peoples have used sandstone in this region. Natural sandstone cliffs were commonly used as buffalo jumps. If we travel a little further south in Alberta, we have carved petroglyphs that contain sacred ancestral knowledge. As well, we have evidence of tools that were shaped from sandstone for its kind of abrasive properties. So here's an example of head smashed in buffalo jump, so a natural sandstone outcropping that was used in order to drive the buffalo and basically kill them for food. Quick shot of some petroglyphs down at Writing on Stone Provincial Park in southern Alberta. You get a sense of how the stone can be carved in order to create messages or leave messages. Here's some examples of stone tools. You can see where an area has been carved out here to create what's called a cupstone, and then here to create what's called straightening stones. Straightening stones are used for straightening arrows to create to straighten the shaft of an arrows. Cupstones, there's different theories about what they were for, so there could be multiple different purposes for what a cupstone is for. All right, so fast forwarding a little closer to the present. So in 1846, sorry, in 1884, Calgary was actually just a town, so it was small and still being developed. It hadn't actually become a city yet. And in 1886, there was a large fire downtown, and 14 of the large wooden buildings were destroyed. At the time, that was much of the downtown core. A law was then passed that new buildings had to be created using fireproof materials such as sandstone. So that's when we suddenly see this boom in sandstone use. And so much sandstone was being used in Calgary at the time that the city became nicknamed the Sandstone City. Right, so here's just an image of after the fire. You can see all these goods and stuff out in the street that have been salvaged from the burned buildings. Here's a shot of one of the sandstone quarries. You kind of get a sense, like this being the banks of one of the rivers, you get a sense of the scale of some of these stones that are being quarried at the time. That's another good reference to scale. You can see some kind of machine being used to cut and straighten the sandstone. All right, now a little bit about this is just right near FFCA High School. So the Beaubank quarries were actually one of the large sandstone suppliers, and this quarry actually took uh, was resided right in the Edgeworthy Park area. So a lot of the stone that you see around downtown in our buildings actually came from these quarries. So here's what that looked like. All right, so this is what remains of one of the quarries today in Edgeworthy Park. All right, so if you start really looking around the city, you'll find sandstone in all kinds of different buildings. I just selected a few for us to look at today, but do, start to just explore your surroundings and look for that material and you'll find it. Most of these buildings that I chose all happen to be built right around 1912, so just before World War II, which will become relevant in a moment. This one's the Memorial Park Library, is what it's now known as. All right. Next, we have Knox United Church. This building is actually a replacement church that replaced the first Knox United Church, which resided close to the Bow Tower downtown. You may remember learning about that in your video that you watched about Lindsay's Folly. There you can see where the Knox United Church is. Just panning to the right, we can see what's called Courthouse Number 2. Um, Quite a different building style with this one. I find it interesting. It's the same, roughly the same time period as many of the other buildings, but just much more stoic, much more kind of imposing design. It doesn't have all that kind of filigree looking um, detail. It's more imposing as a structure. All right, here's an example of one of our sandstone schools. This is Ramsey School. Um, all over town, you'll find these schools. I'm not sure quite how many there are, but there's several of them around the city, and they all look quite similar, and they all have this sandstone um, exterior cladding. One little detail that I'll leave you with here is if you look at the staircase here, I'm just going to go to the next slide and you can see a detail of that. So this is how much that sandstone's actually eroded on these stairs. There's literally piles of sand falling off of the rock. My assumption, and I think based on what I can see here with all of this kind of residue, is that this is a result of salting the stairs to remove snow, and that somebody's being a little bit careless and not realizing that that salt is actually corroding the building itself. But that leads us to one of the reasons why sandstone maybe is not such a common building material now. By the beginning of World War I in 1914, sandstone production in the region waned due to several factors, including the cost of production, the depletion of sandstone from the quarries, and the fact that much of the labor force actually left for Europe to fight in the war. All right, and that's all I have for sandstone.